Hello, everybody. I hope you're well and you're having a fantastic day so far. So I'm very, very, very lucky today to be joined by the one and only Richard Megson. So Richard is the Managing Director of Assured Sales and Progression. Richard, thank you so much for making time in your very busy diary to make some time for us today.
Hi, Chris. Well, listen, thank you for inviting me on. We go back quite a long way, so it's a pleasure to be on screen with you.
Thank you very much. So those people that don't know, we'll call it ASAP. It makes it a bit short, doesn't it? So those that don't know ASAP and yourself, who are you? What are you about?
I'm Richard Megson. I am the Managing Director of Complete ASAP. We have been providing outsourced sales progression services for 9 years now. Work with estate agents up and down the country. And our role, as we see it, is to speed up transaction times and to give the gift of time back to the agent so they don't get bogged down with sales progression and focus on something probably more profitable, like selling more houses.
Right, absolutely. So, well, let's start with transaction times because that's always sort of the big thing when it comes to estate agency because it always feels like everyone should be pulling in the same direction. Everyone wants to move in their new house quicker. Estate agents want to get paid quicker. I'm sure solicitors want to get paid quicker, but yet it takes a really long time to go through the process. So, what are you seeing with the average completion times from exchange and contract through from sale agreed? What are you seeing with those times at the moment?
Our times at the moment are relatively static and have been for probably about 4 or 5 months. We're around, and this is across all the country, freehold, leasehold, just slightly under 100 days. The market average, depending on which commentator you listen to, I would suggest is anywhere between 130 and 150 days, which is shocking.
Yeah, that's a long time. That's a long time. I find myself doing that thing that I do when I talk to pregnant women, Rich, in the nicest way of putting this, where you say it's now 150 days. And I'm like, what's that in real money? What's that in months sort of thing? So absolutely fine. So okay, well that's a long time in the grand scheme. So obviously shorter time with yourselves, but a long time in the grand scheme of things. What do you
Yeah,
find are the biggest delaying factors in that process in general?
I think when it comes to the conveyancing process, there's a lot of moving parts. I think it could be down to the deals that agents put together, but I probably shouldn't have said that since this is an agency audience, so apologies. Um, you've got searches, you've got chains, you've got the conveyancers, you've got the estate agent. There's a whole host of things that can slow a transaction down. But I think a lot of it is down to clients not necessarily knowing what they need to do. Um, Capacity in the conveyancing market has been an issue, but I'm not one of those that always beat up conveyancers, some really good ones throughout the country. But I think there has been a lack of capacity, possibly quite a lot of talent and experience have left the industry over the last 2 years because of pressure. Some of the chains that we see put together probably shouldn't have been put together. There's a whole host of things that happen that can slow a transaction down. We are going to talk about material information, but our viewpoint has always been organize things sooner. So if you're a client, organize your solicitors straight away, order in information as soon as you possibly can, and that would be searches once a sale has been tied up. So there's things that people can do. So we have never accepted that there's nothing you can do to affect the speed of a transaction. And I think we've shown that over the last sort of 8 or 9 years.
Absolutely. I'm always a big fan of sort of the bobsleigh analogy when it comes to sales progression. We thought sales progression and bobsleigh go hand in hand, but I'll try and make it work. So, they say in bobsleigh, if you're a second quicker at the top, then you're 4 seconds quicker at the bottom. And I always kind of use that analogy when it comes to sales progression, that if you put a deal correctly this day one and you put some time and work behind it, make sure everyone's on the same page, they've got solicitors sorted, and everything kind of gets transactional straight away, then great, it flies through pretty quickly. But yeah, we've all been there. We've kind of slightly thrown a deal at the wall because we've been quite excited about getting a deal put together and maybe haven't put the time and due diligence into it possibly could have done. And therefore it may fall apart later on, or these headaches become bigger and bigger as the sales progression goes on.
I'm going to nick that one from you, Chris, because I was nodding my head going, oh, yeah, that analogy, thinking, what on earth is that?
It's a good one. Yeah, it's a good one. Very good.
But there's one thing that I want to sort of tie in with speed, and that's fall through rates. So speed, time from it, sale agreed to exchange, completion, which is an agent's payday. So a slower pipeline turnover, longer transaction times will have an effect on an agent's cash flow. But the other stat that's out there, and it is horrific, is fall through rates of 35%. That is not acceptable and does not make any sort of financial sense for those parties involved in a transaction. So fall through rates is something that really needs to be looked at.
And it's a bit of a broad question here, but why do you think they are so bad? Is it because it takes such a long time that everyone loses the will to live and just give up, or is it the fact they're put together badly in the first place, or what's the big contributing factor that fall through rate is so high?
Well, we've always thought speed is a solution. So we are into generalizations, but we do deal with thousands of transactions. So the longer a transaction goes on, the more that can go wrong. It's self-evident. People do give up. They've had enough. It's just dragged on too long. They give up. But there's all sorts of reasons for fall through rates. But we work with agents that are very proactive, very diligent about the deals they put together, the qualification of the buyer, the motivation of the vendor, but also organizing things sooner. Very, very proactive. One of the interesting debates going on, and this is slightly at a tangent, is no sale, no fee. So no sale, no fee is quite embedded in the estate agency market. It's one of those sort of things that, can it be touched? We're working with agents that are looking at a slightly different charging model where ultimately the final fee is affected by how much a client pays up front. So I'm a firm believer, vendor, buyer, if they've got skin in the game, if there's some sort of financial tie-in and pain if they walk away, they're more likely to take they're going to be more motivated. They are going to go to the finishing line more often than not. And that's certainly borne out by some of the great agents we work with that do actually say, our standard fee is 2% or 1.5%. But if you pay a proportion of that up front, then your ultimate fee will be lower. And their fall through figures are way less than 10%, way less when a client pays some of their fee at the start. So I think this debate will continue to develop, and I'm not convinced that no sale, no fee will be around in 2 or 3 years' time.
Yeah, it's that balance between having a low sort of access to contract effectively. So you want to make the bar as low as possible for anyone to use your services. So making it, free up front to start off with is a pretty low bar in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, then you're shooting yourself in the foot later on if all those free deals fall out of bed, and therefore you've just done all that hard work for nothing. So definitely there's a balancing out between there too somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an agent, so I'm not going to tell an agent how to run their business. But I would question. Sanity is a bit strong, but I would question the merits of providing a professional service completely free of charge. And then when a client walks away, there is no financial penalty. And I think, whether it fall through rate is 25%, 30%, 35%, it's somewhere around that mark. And if your rate of attrition on your work in progress is at least a quarter, that cannot make financial sense.
Is it's on a slight sort of tangent from that tangent, if that makes sense? So we talked about the timescale side of things. Is it a case that if the actual process was able to go through a lot quicker, for example, because I'd imagine that there needs a big kind of digitalization in the sales progression department with solicitors and councils and whatever it may be. There's not many things in the world you wait for, 3 weeks, 4 months, whatever it may be for these reports to come through. There's not many things these days that aren't pretty instant. You press online, great, I want to download so and so report, great, it comes in your inbox 30 seconds later, job done. Is the real issue the fact the lack of speed on that side of things that is basically handcuffing everybody to the speed we're working to at the moment?
Um, well, I mean that there will be improvements on the tech side. It's happening, but is it the silver bullet? No. I mean, you've got a conveyancing industry that's, wide and very varied. You've got some of the bigger conveyancing operations that are very tech-led, and you've got the high street where more traditional practices are in play. You've also got, conveyancing is quite adversarial. So you've got two parties, and they will argue sometimes about, the right resolution, the right outcome. So I don't think that particularly helps. But I mean, we've always positioned ourselves as a service business. Tech will enable mundane tasks to be done, but ultimately our role is to speak to people, to educate, to reassure, to explain, to signpost. But I do think tech, and this is exciting for us, tech will play its part over the next 2 or 3 years to certainly help and facilitate, as I say, some of the more mundane tasks.
Yeah, brilliant. So we speaking of mundane tasks and the future, this goes very hand in hand very nicely. Let's talk about material information. This is all coming
Ah,
up now, and this is all coming in the right sort of direction. So for those people that don't know what material information is and what's coming in the estate agency world and arrived already in the estate agency world, can you chat us through a rough idea about what it is and what's coming?
well, I mean, this has been through the consumer protection regulations. This has been out there for a long time. But guidance has recently been issued, which clarifies exactly what an agent is required to provide on a property. There is a lot of grey area about it, but I mean, I think the regulations are there to be read, and I encourage anybody who hasn't to do. And if you've done it, revisit it. But the basic principle is you as an agent are required by law to provide information on a property that you're going to market. And that would be the buyer's decision to view it and the buyer's decision to offer on the property. The principle of it, I think, is fairly sound. You provide information on a property to a buyer at the start of the process, so they've got more information about the property. So from our point of view, an informed buyer on day one is better than one that's informed 2 months down the line, where something about the property crops up that they could or should have been told, and it's a deal breaker. So, we're big supporters of this. We think material information is going to improve the process. And funnily enough, we actually did a survey of quite a lot of the agents that we work with, and a lot of them cited material information as a way of speeding up transaction times. And we were quite surprised by that. But I think it should be seen as an opportunity. So you've got compliance, which is a given by law, you are required to do it. But then you've got the business case. Actually, is this going to improve the process? Is it going to improve my business? And I think it will.
Is this for those of us who remember 2008, testing my memory of UK regulations, is this a step on the ladder going back towards HIPS? When the Labour government come in 6 months' time, 2 years' time, whenever it may be, are they going to have this brand new idea that it's home information packs and that's going to be the next stage all over again?
Well, it's been referred to as HIPS Light. But yeah, I mean, it's similar in that it's legislated and it's requiring an agent to provide upfront information on a property. So yeah, I mean, it's just a term, but doesn't quite go as far as HIPS, I don't think. But it is about essentially providing information to a buyer.
So can you see a time in the not too distant future where a homeowner will need to spend, I think HIPS packs from memory were 400 quid, 300 quid, that sort of direction to get some information on their property beforehand. So that hypothetically they could hand it over to the buyer and say, this is what you're looking at.
Well, no, the regulations say, as the agent, you are required to provide this information. I mean, looking at the regulations, I think the phrasing is provide the information in a timely fashion. Now that hasn't been tested yet. So will this information need to be provided on day one, or at a future date? I think that is a grey area. But no, ultimately you need to compile information on the property, EPC, planning, a whole range of things to the buyer at the point of marketing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do I think agents will monetize it? Potentially, as they are monetizing AMLs. That's not my job. We are about to launch. Well, we are telling our existing clients about our solution as we speak. We will be going to the wider market later in March with our solution for compliance with material information, and it is very straightforward. It is about no disruption. You know, compliance can be fairly straightforward. It covers you back. Just get on with it.
I can see a future where estate agents have the home information pack, like whatever we're going to call it for the future, and they will pay for that up front, and suddenly they will use that as a tie into their estate agency period and say, if you want to leave us and walk away from ourselves, suddenly you have to pay for this. I remember people doing that quite a lot of home information packs the first time around. I can kind of see the future where that happens all over again. Do you think that would happen at all?
Yeah, potentially.
Yep. It's always my estate agency brain. Read the rules once to see how you can make them work, and then read them again to see how you can find the holes in it. I think that's probably a big hole that estate agents will look at and go, "We'll pay for this stuff up front, Mrs. Jones." But then when it comes to the withdrawal side of things, if they do want to withdraw, they'll go, "Right, well that's 600 quid. Thank you very much." So
I mean, the estate agents, you know, as a set, a fairly fleet of foot, and there will be a number of ways that this is positioned. But at the end of the day, I'm the agent. I'm legally required to get information on your property, Chris, and it's going to cost me. Therefore, why wouldn't you pay? It's, you know, I'm required to do it. There will be some agents that absorb the costs. There will be some agents that don't actually do it. But I think best practice will allow the better agents to start really differentiating themselves, because without doubt, you're going in there as an agent talking about material information, and the client will be saying, well, the two other agents that were in just before you didn't even mention it. I think that's an opportunity. But as I say, it comes back, compliance is the easy piece, you know, if you engage with the right suppliers. But commercially, this, we think, will benefit, because fall through rates should fall and transaction times should speed up.
So, question for you, Richard. What do you see as some of the challenges around material information coming out?
To me, one of the key ones is going to be the sort of fulfillment of the information to provide back to the agent to present to a potential viewer stroke buyer. I think some of the data is fairly accessible, but one of the things that an agent will be required is to send out the legal forms, a property information questionnaire, get that completed and sent back. And I think that is going to be quite time consuming and probably a bit of an administrative nightmare. So one of the things that we're absolutely focusing on is obviously providing the data, but also the resource to do the fulfillment of a completed PIQ. So we've got a team ready to chase clients to make sure they understand what they're completing and sending it back. So we've got a digital and a verbal onboarding journey to make sure that their forms come back. So I think that is going to be a challenge for the admin teams within agency. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, certainly there's enough paperwork around taking a property on the market already within reason sort of thing, without having an extra kind of plate added to that pile to say, actually, now you need to do this as well, added on top of it. So I can imagine that's going to be a bit of an administrative nightmare, I wouldn't say, but probably certainly a burden for many agents.
Well, some, you know, agents do some of this anyway, but ultimately, back to timeframes and reasonable timeframes, this needs to come back completed so the information can be presented to a buyer. So the timeframes that you're talking about are probably 3 to 4 days before it starts impacting on putting a property on the market or having the requisite information to present to a buyer.
Yeah, sure. That's a very key point. And obviously, that's another aspect that's going to affect estate agents in a big way, without a doubt. Let's focus back on the sales progression side of things, on kind of the core aspect of that. What are some key bits of advice you would have for any estate agents that are listening to this and thinking to themselves, actually, my fall through rate is at 30% after sale agreed, for example, and I'd much rather that was down at 20%, 25%, 0% ideally. What some key bits of advice you would give those individuals watching this?
Um, to me, sales progression is a dedicated role and it requires dedicated resource. So whether you outsource to a business like mine or whether you do it in-house, you need somebody to be doing your sales progression. Now, we work with a whole sort of range of agents, multi-branch down to individuals, but and the growth of self-employed is really quite interesting because some of these are really experienced agencies, but they are, as they grow their business, they're going to be time poor. So can they afford to employ somebody to do sales progression? Probably not. Do they look at the cost of outsourcing it to a business like mine as prohibitive? My view would always be it's the opportunity cost. And we think a case, on average, 12 to 15 hours for each case to progress. As an agent's pipeline grows, that becomes quite chunky in terms of the time required. But if you don't have a dedicated resource doing it, then you ultimately don't have control over that case to the end. So first and foremost, I've always said, however you do it, make sure you've got one set of eyes on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key parts when it comes to well, anything, but especially sales progression, is having that communication and having that open communication with the buyers. I've been working with an estate agent historically on one of my own properties, and they do everything they should be doing, but the communication is terrible. So I phone up and saying, "Have you done this, this, and this?" And they say, "Yeah, we've done it all." I'm like, "Why have you told me? I just want to know what's going on," and that frustrates me. So I think it needs to be an outgoing communication from that estate agent saying, "This is where we're up to. This is what next. This is when I'm going to contact you next." So they need to be on the ball on that side. Just doing it and
Yeah,
not telling somebody isn't ideal.
agree. I mean, we work with plenty of agents where sales progression is part of somebody's role. So they're negging as well. I mean, my question would always be, well, at the end of the day, what is the one thing you want them to have delivered in that day? If they're getting pulled every which way and the phone calls, the phone's ringing off the hook and they're not getting back because they're dealing with something else, that in itself becomes quite challenging.
Yeah, quite. I always use kind of the rev limiter for a one person band being kind of 15 properties for sale, 15 properties under offer. And, if you've got those sort of numbers going through your business, you're pretty busy.
Yeah.
And you need to refine your processes down. Otherwise, you are going to be absolutely manic. So I always see it as kind of three sections of it. One is sort of the lead generation part of your business, kind of how do you get your phone ringing? Then
Yeah.
there's viewings, valuations, sales negotiation, kind of the core estate agency stuff in the middle. And then you've got sales progression. And certainly the conversation I have lots of guys I work with is that I ideally want to do that over time. So the leads generation stuff is taken away from them, the sales progression stuff is taken away from them, and they're just left doing the core bit in the middle, and effectively they become a very well paid viewer and valuer of properties.
Yeah, because that will be the most profitable use of their time, without doubt.
Yep. Good. Richard, thank you so much for your time today. It's been very insightful. Thank you very much. If anyone wants to get hold of yourself, how can they do that?
They can contact me by email, which you can give out, and you've got my mobile as well. So yeah, anybody who wants to speak to me about it, feel free to contact
Perfect.
me.
I'll use my skillful editing skills and I'll put them on the screen right about now.
Perfect.
Richard, thank you for your time today. It's been very much appreciated.
Yeah, good to see you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Cheers, Richard.
Cheers, man.